Strap yourselves in, folks. This could be a long one.
Xbox,
Twitter, Uber,
Postmates,
Netflix, MoviePass,
Google, Facebook, eBay,
DoorDash,
Apple, Amazon, Airbnb,
The Apptrepreneur. Hey everyone, this is Kevin the Apptrepreneur, and we are going to talk about fares and how much Uber and Lyft take away. Now, several months ago, well, not months ago, was it months ago or was it just weeks? The time flies, I tell you. Jalopnik asked for people to send them screenshots of, well, fares that have been taken, like, your Uber and Lyft fares. They wanted to see exactly how much money Uber and Lyft was taking from the fares, and if, in fact, Uber and Lyft frequently took more than 50% of the driver's fare. Now Jalopnik has released their report. They've released their article. We're going to go over the entire thing. Again, this could be a long one, and the results are not pretty. However, before we talk about any of that, let's have a word from our sponsors. Times are changing for gig workers and the gig economy, and there are a lot more gigs from a lot more companies than there used to be. That's why when people ask me where they can go to find resources for the gig economy, I recommend gigworker.com. At this site, you can see what other gig workers are doing and discover better opportunities from industries, companies, resources, and even a forum where you can talk with other people in the gig economy. Gigworker.com is a great resource site, whether you work for Uber, Lyft, Postmates, DoorDash, TaxRabbit, Thumbtack, Upwork, whatever. There's a gig for you and there's a forum for you on gigworker.com. Gigworker.com for all your gigs. Uber and Lyft take a lot more from drivers than they say. That is the title of this article, accompanied by this wonderful graph. As you can see, this graph shows a bunch of cars and money. The cars go forward to, I guess that's the driver's responsibility, their own vehicles. You'll see the money goes either to Uber or it goes to Lyft. It's not heading any direction to where the drivers are heading. I think that is a very appropriate image for this. So let's look at this. And by the way, the article was written by Aaron Gordon and Duar Mehrota. I'm sorry, Mehrota. I hope I pronounced that. I didn't pronounce that right. I'm sorry, Dirav. And by the way, I like Aaron Gordon's writing. He has written many wonderful articles that should be essential reading for Uber and Lyft driver. We've covered several of them ourselves. And he's the one who put this investigation forward a few months ago. And it was taking a long time. And I mean, I was a little concerned that we would never see the article. However, people assured me, no, he's working on it. It's becoming bigger than you could possibly imagine. And here's the results. So it says, in July, an Uber driver, we'll call Dave, his name has been changed here to protect his identity, picked up a fare in a trendy neighborhood of a major U.S. metropolitan area. It was rush hour and surge pricing was in effect due to increased demand, meaning that Dave would be paid almost twice the regular fare. I'm sure many drivers have found themselves in a situation very much like this. Even though the trip was only 5 miles, it lasted for more than a half hour because his passenger scheduled a stop at Taco Bell for dinner, also a fairly frequent occurrence. Dave knew, sitting at the restaurant waiting for his fares, to get a Doritos cheesy gordita crunch or whatever would cost him money. He was earning only 21 cents a minute and the meter was running compared to 60 cents per mile. With surge pricing in effect, it would be far more lucrative to keep driving and picking up new fares than sitting in a parking lot, especially since you want to get those passengers to their destination and pick up preferably another surge fare. But Dave, who was granted anonymity out of fear of being deactivated by the ride-hail giant for speaking to the press, had no real choice but to wait. The passenger had requested the stop through the app, so refusing to make it would have been contentious both with the customer and with Uber. The exact number varies by city, but drivers must maintain a high rating in order to work on their platform. It doesn't really vary that much. 4.9, 4.6. 4.6, that's the average. Some places 4.5, some it's 4.7, most of the time 4.6. Let's just clear that up. And there's widespread belief among drivers that the Uber algorithm punishes drivers for canceling trips. Ultimately, the rider paid $65 for the half-hour trip, according to a receipt viewed by Jalopnik. But Dave made only $15. The fares have been routed to anonymize the transaction. Uber kept the rest, meaning the multi-billion dollar corporation kept more than 75% of the fare. more than triple the average so-called take rate in claims in financial reports with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Had he known in advance how much he would have been paid for the ride relative to what the rider paid, Dave said he never would have accepted the fare, and I believe many people are in his boat. This is robbery, he told Jalopnik over email. This business is out of control. Dave is far from alone in his frustrations. Uber and Lyft have slashed driver pay in recent years and now take a larger portion of each fare, far larger than the companies publicly report based on data collected by Jalopnik. And the new surge or primetime pricing structure, widely adopted by both companies, undermines a key legal argument both companies make to classify drivers as independent contractors. And this is why AB5 might be very important if you want things to be legal. Jalopnik asked drivers to send us fare receipts showing a breakdown of how much the rider paid for the trip, how much of that fare Uber or Lyft kept, and what the driver earned. In total, we received 14,756 fares. I'm going to be perfectly frank, probably 100 of them are from me because I shared every fare that people sent me with them, even if it wasn't that big of a difference. I just sent as much as I could. These came from two sources: the web form where drivers could submit fares individually, and via email where some drivers sent us all their fares from a given time period. Of all the fares Jalopnik examined, Uber kept 35% of the revenue, while Lyft kept 38%. Now, here's where some of you might say, well, that's not more than 50. 50% is not the average. Here's the thing. It's supposed to be 25%. In both cases, that's what you agreed for Uber and Lyft to take out. Yet, the average for Uber is 35%. That's 10% more than what they're supposed to be taking. And with Lyft, that's more than 18% of what they're supposed to be taking. Keep that in mind. These numbers are roughly in line with a previous study by Lawrence Michel at the Economic Policy Institute, which concluded Uber's take rate to be roughly 1/3 or 33%. Of the drivers who emailed us breakdowns for all of their fares in a given time period ranging from a few months to more than a year, Uber kept on average 29.6%, Lyft pocketed 34.5%. Those take rates are 10.6% and 8.5% higher than Uber and Lyft's publicly reported figures, respectively. That's the kind of thing that can get companies in trouble. So, by the way, here's a pie chart of Uber and Lyft's cut from each of Jalopnik's fares. So, as you can see, the most that they had taken was 30 to 40%, but not far behind 40 to 50%. In fact, the lowest amount of percentage fares that was taken was less than 10%. No surprise, of course. 50% was a little low. 10 and 20% and 50+% were probably the second to last in terms of how much was taken away. And then 20 to 30%, that was, well, which is what should be. By the way, the 20 to 30% should be like more than half of this pie. Instead, it's a quarter of the pie. So there you go. In regulatory filings, Uber has reported its so-called take rate is actually going down from 21.7% in 2018 to 19% in the second quarter of 2019. Uber declined to offer US-only figures for a more direct comparison to Jalopnik's findings. Well, I don't know about that, but this 19%, that's this line, this dark blue right here. That's not an increase, guys. That is definitely on the lower end of what Uber and what Lyft will take out. So anyway, let's see here. Business Insider has previously reported Lyft's take rate for 2016 was 26.8%, although Lyft claimed it does not publicly share their take rates and declined to do so with Jalopnik. Well, of course they're not going to do that. They'd probably make them look really bad if they did. When asked for comment, Uber and Lyft disputed Jalopnik's findings as flawed and not representative of their overall business. We knew that was coming. We absolutely knew that was coming. But neither company agreed to Jalopnik's request to provide statistically significant data sets of anonymized fares for independent verification, continuing their long-standing pattern of data security. So here's where we get a major problem with Uber and Lyft in general. Every single time one of these reports come out, they say, hush posh, I tell you, our fares are not like that. We take far less. You are misrepresenting the data. And then they're like, well, why don't you show us your numbers and we can compare? Preposterous. We don't do that. That would be a breach of security. They always do that. every single time. They get this old stuffy British voice and it's like, orthodox for you to actually request transparency. You know, there's a very bad Ian McKellen impression. And they do it every single time. And yet, as we see, Business Insider and Jalopnik and other sources have, by the way, tested these numbers. They've looked through the receipts. They've done their own independent verifications. And guess what? They all come to very similar numbers. In fact, personally, I think if Uber and Lyft shared the numbers, it might be worse. That's the main reason they're not going to do it, of course. Anyway, let's continue. Trips like the $65 Taco Bell run only highlight inequities between the multi-billion-dollar companies and drivers earning at or below minimum wage. When asked about that fare, an Uber spokesman acknowledged, quote, "For all the pain points New Surge helps solve, it has its challenges. Top among them is the fact that drivers may earn comparatively less on longer Surge trips, even if they earn Surge more frequently." You know what? It doesn't have to be this complicated, Uber. You know what? Take 20%. 20% of whatever the fare is. It's simple. It's very simple. It's moving a decimal point. You don't need to make it this complicated. The spokesperson added that, quote, "To better serve drivers, we often increase surge payments on longer trips with added amounts that vary based on length of trip. Drivers are able to see this additional amount on their trip receipt after the trip is over." Yeah, you know what? Yeah. You can do that with the multiplier. By the way, you still do the multiplier. You just use arbitrary algorithmic reasons for who gets paid what. By the way, Dave received no such increase. So, trips like Dave's also expose inconsistencies in their very logic under which these companies operate. Drivers like Dave are technically independent contractors, but they have no control over many aspects of their work life, including the price of their own services. This is a point I have been hammering in since day one. People come on my channel all the times and they say, "Fool, you don't want to be an independent contractor. I don't want to be," no, sorry, I'm taking that back. Sorry, I messed that up. They say, "Fool, you don't want to be an employee. I don't want to be an employee." And then sometimes I juvenilely respond, "Fool, you are an employee. Have you not looked at the lack of control you have? You are an employee regardless what you think. You might as well get paid and treated like one." But I digress. Let's continue. Quote, where'd that go up? "This is really fascinating and troubling," said Sandeep Vaheesan, legal director of the Open Markets Institute, a nonprofit studying corporate concentration and monopoly power, when briefed on Jalopnik's findings. Vaheesan went on to say the findings support the argument that their business model is built on large-scale labor exploitation. "This is, as far as I know, the most convincing data that we have at the individual driver level about the share that Uber takes of every driver's gross earnings," said Marshall Steinbaum, an economist at the University of Utah who studies labor markets. "And in that respect, it moves the ball a lot forward in terms of understanding how these labor markets work." He added that if their, Uber and Lyft's response, is this is not representative of all drivers, it is representative of other people who have tried to verify their claims and found them wanting, aka wrong. To be sure, Jalopnik's data is not perfect. The sample of 14,756 fares, of which a little over 100 probably came from me, is a tiny fraction of the millions of trips Uber and Lyft complete each day in the US alone. It would be impossible for any independent researcher to get their hands on an adequate data set without Uber and Lyft's cooperation or, in theory, more nefarious methods such as hacking or data breaches. You know, when you read a paragraph like that, I kind of imagine that little clip from Super Size Me where Morgan Spurlock is trying to get an interview with the CEO of McDonald's, and he holds up a Ronald McDonald toy and holds it to the camera and says, "You will not know anything, and you'll like it." That's kind of how it feels like with this. Because Uber and Lyft are never transparent, and they will never be transparent unless they are legally required to be so. And there was almost certainly some degree of selection bias in Jalopnik's data acquired via the web form towards drivers who are unhappy with their share and would therefore be more likely to take the time to submit their fare. You know, I'm going to dispute that just a little bit, Jalopnik, because here's the thing. It is true that people who are unhappy with their fare are probably the ones who are most likely going to submit receipts. It just makes sense. However, even if let's say there was like 20,000 people who didn't care, they were perfectly fine with their rates, but hey, you know what? They decided, what the heck, we're going to send the receipts anyway. Guess what? I bet you the results would be very, very similar. Just a suspicion, but I think they'd be very similar. Along those lines, the fares Jalopnik received through the web form were disproportionately from outside of Uber and Lyft's major metropolitan markets and during surge times, indicating a possible selection bias in our findings. Well, I think it's not necessarily a bias. Maybe it is. I think what it shows more than likely is that when it comes to surge, that's where you're going to get the biggest discrepancy. When it's regular fare, it might not be as egregious, so to speak. Because here's the thing, Uber and Lyft have to show some level of, if every single ride was like 50%, people would be way more up in arms, even the average people. But if it's just surge, and they explain to people who are trying this new surge, and they explain you will make more on certain rides and less on others, and some drivers see, yeah, okay, on longer rides, I don't get as much surge, but on shorter rides, I do get more surge, then yeah, they probably don't report it. But people who really depend on surge for a long time have noticed a major difference. That's why you're seeing them. And I believe it is true that the fares will be more out of sync with each other when it comes to surge pricing for that reason. So, let's see here. While 8,926 fares is a large increase from the 175 you had before, an Uber spokesman said, it's still not a statistically representative sample given Uber's completes approximately 15 million trips per day around the world. Yeah, but here's the thing, Uber, the percentage was very similar. It was very similar. It was about 30 to 35%, whether it was 175 or 15,000. That's just what it was. So there you go. I wonder what that noise is. If you can hear that in the background, I'm sorry, folks. But there are also reasons to believe our findings are more representative of the individual driver experience than Uber and Lyft would care to admit. Even the complete fare records Jalopnik received showed a higher take rate than previously reported. And these drivers, Steinbaum observed, may present a selection bias in the other direction. By keeping diligent records, quote, they're probably the savviest drivers and therefore the ones that the companies are least able to fleece, so to speak. So you might be getting an underestimate of their take from them. I believe that. I believe that if Uber and Lyft showed the real take-home from the vast majority of the drivers, especially the ones that don't complain, it'd be very, very different. Lyft disputed this as well. A spokesperson told Jalopnik, even if the investigation looked at every ride for a handful of drivers, the same pool of drivers needs to accurately reflect a cross-selection of all Lyft drivers and not just a specific subset, i.e., did the sample size have enough diversity to say it represents the average experience for Lyft drivers across the board? I'm going to say yes, but of course, I'm biased then. So, in regulatory filings, court cases, and their terms of service, Uber and Lyft claim to merely be facilitators between the rider and the driver, not a transportation service. We've heard that argument. It's bullshit. We know it is. They claim their actual customers are drivers, which, of course, I've brought this up many, many times. What company treats their drivers so despicably, so horribly? Funimation? Maybe. Yeah, maybe Funimation. And possibly Comcast. And drivers pay Uber and Lyft a cut of their earnings for connecting them with their customers, the riders. This echoes a common Silicon Valley refrain. They are just technology companies and therefore should not be subject to the regulations of the industries they are disrupting. But in recent years, in efforts to stem the tide of their multi-billion-dollar losses, both ride-hail companies have separated what riders pay from what drivers earn, moving away from a strict percentage-based commission, which worked and was easy to understand, and therefore it benefited the driver. So obviously Uber and Lyft don't want that. Using what it calls upfront pricing, first instituted in 2016, Uber tells riders exactly how much they'll pay before the trip begins based on their own algorithm's prediction. As is often the case, Lyft instituted the same policy shortly after Uber. It then compensates drivers based on the trip's actual time and distance. According to both companies, the change to upfront pricing was made in response to rider and driver feedback. Riders didn't want to be surprised with a higher bill, and drivers wanted to be compensated for the work they actually performed. Well, yeah, but here's the thing, though. And this is how Uber and Lyft screw both of them. Because there's extra money there. And in that case, they are taking money from passengers that passengers should not have to pay. And if passengers are paying it, that means it's part of the work. So the driver should get a cut of that. It screws everyone. And I am amazed passengers are not more aware of this. And when they are aware of it, they really don't seem to care. Anyway, this common sense policy has potentially profound legal implications. In practice, upfront pricing decouples the rider's payment from the driver's earnings. One price is set before the ride based on an estimate, the other after the ride is completed based on reality. This change is most evident with how Uber and Lyft now handle high demand periods. Along with the move to upfront pricing, both companies also changed the way that their high demand pricing model, often known as surge or prime time, works. Lyft has since changed the brand name to personal power zones for drivers, which, by the way, implied finger the personal power zones. Nobody likes that. Instead of drivers receiving a multiplier on their earnings, as Dave did for the Taco Bell run, most now get a flat fee bonus, typically only a few dollars per ride. Yeah, there you go. Uber and Lyft will sometimes kick the drivers a couple extra bucks if the surge is particularly high or the ride especially long, but there seems to be little rhyme or reason when this happens. Riders, meanwhile, still pay the multiplier, meaning riders are often paying far more than drivers are earning on those rides. Sorry for the cutaway. There was something going on back there. Anyway, an Uber spokesman explained this dynamic to Jalopnik as follows. While driver and rider side surge are both tied to real-time imbalances in supply and demand, what a rider pays in surge and what a driver earns from surge on a given trip isn't always the same. This is due in part to the fact that new driver surge is based on the driver's location, not the rider's. What this means is that a driver may receive a surge on a trip even if the rider doesn't pay anything extra. Yeah, but this is super, super rare. It is very, very rare. In fact, I would go so far as to say Uber and Lyft go as out of their way to make sure this does not happen. The algorithms figure out not to do this unless it's absolutely necessary. Because why would they want to lose money? They're already blowing through billions of dollars every quarter. Why would they want to blow through more? Similarly, a Lyft spokesperson said Lyft continues to pass the rider prime time onto the drivers via PPZs at the same rate in aggregate. There are differences on a ride level, but these differences cut in both directions, in that sometimes drivers earn an unusually higher or lower percentage of the fare. It's rare, but it happens. In other words, Uber and Lyft say they are taking all the surge charges riders pay and spreading the proceeds among all the drivers in the area, whether their particular passenger pays a surge fare or not. Both companies deny merely pocketing the difference. Yeah, of course they pocket the difference. I mean, when you read this, it's like, who would have thought Uber and Lyft had such communistic socialist ideas that they decide, hey, we're going to be like a communist company. We're going to spread the wealth and the love around. We're not just going to take it for ourselves. We're going to spread it around. That's essentially their message here. Okay, this according to Wayne State University law professor Sanjuka Paul, who has written extensively on the ride-hailing industry, is a new wrinkle in the independent contractor debate because it doesn't align with the arguments the companies make that they merely facilitate interactions between two independent actors in a market. The economic reality is Uber and Lyft, are collecting the fare from the consumer and then making a capital firm decision, which in this case doesn't sound like a very bad decision. Actually making quite a sensible decision, she said. But it shows that they are a firm that is charging customers and then making decisions with that money, including how to pay a labor force. Or, as Steinbaum put it, what they're doing is exactly what employers do with their workers. I'm going to say that again. What they're doing is exactly what employers do with their workers. Guys, if AB5 passes, you won't be workers because you already are. You won't just magically become them. In addition, the companies can and have changed the base time and distance rates drivers earn whenever they want, and there have been many pay cuts. Remember, when I started, $2.60 a mile. Now, 40 cents a mile. Anyway, in recent years, driver forums have been flooded with angry comments about hastily announced pay cuts in markets around the country. This, despite drivers already making near or sometimes below minimum wage. These cuts have led to some drivers who spoke with Jalopnik on the condition of anonymity, curtailing their own hours or exiting the ride-hail business entirely because it's no longer worth their time after accounting for expenses like fuel, insurance, and car payments. Uber and Lyft both deny that driver earnings have declined. How have they not declined? You keep cutting the rates. There is a huge difference between $2.06 a mile and 40 cents a mile. I mean, you know what Uber and Lyft sometimes remind me of? They remind me of Cartman from South Park. Sweetie, did you burn the cat on fire? But ma'am, the cat's not hurt. It's like, Punky dear, you should not light the cat on fire. But ma'am, that's what Uber and Lyft look like. Like they. How much longer is this article? They're pissing me off now. While not every driver has the same experience, Uber, they should have the same experience when it comes to the pay. This experience should be every single time. Hey, I did this trip and they took this much out, 20%. It should be the same every single time. Anyway, that's not what we see when we look at trends in drivers' average hourly earnings over the last couple of years, which have increased. No, they've decreased. You can't convince me of that unless you share your data, Uber. A Lyft spokesperson told Jalopnik the number of drivers on their platform is increasing and that driver earnings increased over the past years. That's a key thing right there. A Lyft spokesperson told Jalopnik the number of drivers on their platform is increasing. That's not an argument that drivers aren't getting paid better. You know what that kind of supports? That actually supports the exact opposite. That supports that they are emboldened to keep doing price decreases because they keep getting drivers. Why on earth would they change for that? The company claims drivers make more than $30 per booked hour nationally. Yes, booked. Important. Although that figure only accounts for the time when a driver accepts a ride request to when the passenger is dropped off and does not include expenses. So let me explain the booked hour nationally thing in case you are unaware of what it is. The booked hour is where Uber and Lyft basically test, like, how much money will someone make if they are always driving and always moving within an hour. And they've estimated over $30 an hour. And they're not lying when they say that. Where they are lying is by omission, because you're not going to be driving the whole hour for the most part. They're at one speed. There's going to be slowdowns. There's going to be stops. There's going to be waiting. There might be a pit stop to Taco Bell. And you also, in some cases, you do have more than 1 hour rides, but you aren't always booked for an hour. So it's very rare. The only way you really get this $30 per booked hour is, say, somebody calls you in San Diego right next to the freeway, and they want to go to Las Vegas and there's no traffic. Very unusual, very unlikely. But they go on the freeway, the slowdown is very, very minimal. They don't make any pit stops, and the trip is about 65 minutes. Then you will make more than $30 an hour. And of course, although that figure only accounts from the time when a driver accepts a ride request to when the passenger is dropped off and does not include expenses. Some drivers didn't even realize the extent of the changes in the company's take rates, both for high demand trips specifically and across the board, until they compiled their records to send to Jalopnik. One driver who has been working for Uber in Texas for 3 years sent us almost 500 surge fares. Kind of depressing to know that Uber used to take 20% when I started and now gets an average 31%, with some fares up to 50%, he said. A former full-time driver from Iowa said that prior to the pay cuts that ultimately slashed his per mile rate more than half, he estimates about 30% of the fares he picked up were, after Uber and Lyft's cut, not worth his time. After those changes from 2018 onward, he says the number of undesirable fares is now closer to 70 to 80%, which is why he stopped driving full-time. And here's a little side note from them. It's tricky to compare ride hail take rates with the taxi industry in any meaningful way, where drivers are on the hook for fixed expenses such as dispatching services, leasing the taxi, and or paying off the cost of a medallion. Taxi drivers have to pay those fees regardless how much money they earn. In fact, many taxi drivers switched to ride-hailing because percentage-based commissions along with the hefty sign-up bonuses for Uber and Lyft once offered sounded like a better deal. At least at the time, they probably sounded like a better deal. The driver's frustrations with pay cuts and Uber and Lyft's rising take rates are compounded by other inequities of the ride-hailing industry. Uber and Lyft argue that drivers are not employees but independent contractors since they are allowed to set their own schedules. And by the way, this is still, to this day, Uber and Lyft's best defense for the independent contractor argument. Both companies lean heavily on this argument in advertisements and promotions to recruit drivers, using phrases like "be your own boss" to describe the arrangement. Yeah, you know what being your own boss also means? Being your own boss also means being able to charge 50 cents for an apple even if the grocery store next door is selling it for 35 cents. But the reality is much more complicated. In fact, drivers don't have the power to make any of the decisions that typically come with self-employment. Chief among them is the ability to set prices or even negotiate for the services they provide. In driver agreements, both companies state that drivers accept their new rates simply by continuing to drive for the company. In other words, the only recourse drivers have to a pay cut is to quit, a familiar arrangement for any employee, but not for anyone who is their own boss, and thus would not have income determined by another company's ever-changing set of rules. Quote, "It's really crazy how companies have carte blanche to deprive us of our rights through contract," the Heeson wrote in a follow-up email after Jalopnik showed him the contract language. Courts and Congress have basically accepted this regime as normal. Boy, what would the founding fathers think? Furthermore, drivers have the option to decline or cancel rides, but there is widespread belief among drivers that if they do it too often, they risk being put in timeouts where they receive no requests at all for a certain amount of time, a phenomenon that is frequently documented in drivers' forums and blogs. Yeah, independent contractor. And if you don't do as many rides as they say, yeah, you get timed out. There you go. Both companies deny they punish drivers in any way for declining rides, but Lyft acknowledged some incentives are only available to drivers with high ride acceptance rates. In another bid to increase revenue, Uber is rolling out Comfort Mode, which provides rider amenities such as a car with extra legroom, the option to set a desired temperature, or request the driver be quiet for an extra fee. Drivers for comfort rides get a few cents extra added to their mile and time rates, although the lion's share goes to Uber, even though you're technically the one who are complying with these requests. Uber says this is merely a request to the driver rather than a requirement, but riders are unlikely to be pleased if a driver refuses to comply with a request they paid extra for. Should a driver not follow the instructions, it is likely they would at the very least receive a lower rating, and we all know what lower rating. Rather than being their own bosses, drivers often feel as if they are being governed by algorithms, as Alex Rosenblatt wrote in her deeply reported book, Uberland, how algorithms are rewriting the rules of work. This algorithmic boss, which sets pay rates to an opaque ways, I probably pronounced that wrong, I'm sorry, and governs work rules through carrot and stick arrangements, not only removes any accountability, but results in drivers having to guess what the algorithm wants. In her book, Rosenblatt wrote, "An algorithmic manager enacts its policies, penalizes drivers for behaving in a manner unlike what Uber suggests, and incentivizes them to work at particular places in particular times. When I ask drivers if they are their own boss, they usually pause and remark it's sort of true and that they set their own schedule, but an app employer provides a type of experience that differs from human interactions, and it can be challenging to identify the fault lines of autonomy and control them with its automated system, aka the invisible boss." In an interview for this story, Rosenblatt, who spoke to hundreds of drivers researching her book, added that drivers had different reactions to rides where they thought they didn't get a fair cut. Some drivers were pissed, and they would say, if I'm an independent contractor, you should give me the information I need to make an informed choice. But other drivers rationalize taking bad fares with the idea that taking a bad one is kind of like karma. If you only take a passenger a couple of blocks on this ride, you might get compensated for a better ride later. Yeah. Okay. Rosenblatt added that the karmic realignment theory is a direct result of the lack of transparency from the ride-hail giants. She characterized it as a magical thinking drivers wouldn't have to resort to if Uber and Lyft gave them the actual facilities to make informed decisions or to better understand how they might be treated or rewarded and penalized for their work performance with valuable or less valuable dispatches. Basically, if people knew how the system worked, they would probably exploit it. Thus, Uber doesn't want you to know, or Lyft for that matter. A full-time veteran driver from New Orleans told Jalopnik that she somewhat subscribes to the karmic realignment theory on the take rates. Although recent cuts have changed her attitude a bit, she has seen her earnings drop roughly 20% this year due to a combination of factors, including an expanding of the driver pool as a result of the companies allowing older vehicles than prior years, not on Lyft though. As a result, she is considering a job change, even though an occasional health issue makes the flexible hours of ride-hailing especially appealing. Even though she prefers driving to her previous jobs in the service industry, she said, excuse me, she has come to believe Uber and Lyft's take rates ought to be capped, perhaps at 25 or 30%, and she would get behind a driver organizing campaign to make the profession more sustainable. Hello, just letting you know. But for now, she still avoids looking at individual fare breakdowns. It just annoys me, she said, and there's nothing I can do about it. Well, you can quit, but that's also... Let's look at this chart before we end this, because this has gone on long enough. For those of you who have stuck around to the end, I thank you so much for doing that. Just give me a few more minutes of your time. As you can see, look at this chart. Unless you're driving and you're listening to this podcast style, which I hear a lot of my viewers do, then keep your eye on the road at about the 36, 37 minute point. I don't know exactly where. That's when you can come back and look at this chart more in detail. Like more than half of the fares have 30 to 50% taken out of your fare. What happened to 20%? The 25% is in a quarter, which could still be 30%. And 50+% is also almost a quarter. Look at it. This is highway robbery. This is highway robbery. And you know what? I don't even care, really. I mean, I'm not going to judge people for why they do what they do. Again, if you want to drive like a madman and make $2,000 a week, I guess you're allowed to do that. But knowing that you should be making $4,000? I don't know. I just don't know. And this is why I tell people, you've got to quit. If this is not okay with you, you need to quit. I'm really surprised how many people this is okay with. I mean, again, their prerogative. I mean, there's some guy, I know, won't name him. He's perfectly okay with this. One of the nicest guys I know on YouTube. Perfectly okay with this. You know, I'm sure he has his reasons. I look at this and it's like, man, I mean, I remember when I worked for Fry's Electronics, and it was all commission-based. Like, basically, the way the payment worked for Fry, I don't know if this is still how it is, but you would get paid a kind of a commission hourly wage. Like, if you hit a sales number and you exceeded that sales number, you got a pay raise. If you sold below the sales expectations, then you got a pay cut. And I remember when I worked there within the course of 2 years, I think it went up once. It went up 50 cents. And then I remember like a year later, it was like down by like $1 something because we had like a pretty bad sales year. And that $1.35 an hour was felt. And that wasn't even 5% of my paycheck. This is 30% or more in the vast majority of cases. And it doesn't hurt you at all. It doesn't make you pause just a little bit. I'm not talking to one person per se at this point. I'm talking to people in general. This doesn't make you stop and think. Here's the thing. I'm going to continue to report it because I think this is wrong and I think it needs to be reported, whether or not anyone actually hears me or not. It might be a old man shouts at cloud scenario. I don't care. This is highway robbery. And thank you to Aaron Gordon and his partner at Jalopnik for putting this report together. I'm going to link to it below. You can look at all of this. You can share this article if this video is too long. But make people aware of this. This is not okay. It's absolutely not. And if you're okay with it, I guess it's your prerogative. It absolutely is. But if you're okay with this, would it be safe for me to assume just a little bit that maybe making money isn't a priority for you? At least you aren't making your living on this. But for people who have to make their living from this sucks. This not only sucks, it's evil. Anyway, I've been rambling for almost an hour, and no one should have to hear me ramble for an hour for a main topic that's not even a live chat. So, anyway, what do you think? What do you think? I'd love to know. So, comment below, like, favorite, share, subscribe. If you enjoy my videos, consider becoming a Patreon member. It's totally optional, of course, but even as little as $1 a month goes a long way to helping the channel run smoothly, and you get access to my Patreon's exclusive blog. If gas prices get you just a little down, check out the Get Upside app below. It's totally free, and you get cash back on every gas purchase. If you want some videos from me that are not Ride related, check me out at the Apptrepreneur vlogs, Kevin T. Rodriguez, and Autograph Hound channels. And finally, if you want to talk to me, other drivers, this article, check us out on YouTube at, sorry, long video. Check us out on Facebook at the Apptrepreneur Hangout. And as always, flame responsibly, have a good one. Whew. Aren't you glad this one's over?